Oh, welcome to SquishiVision. I have just finished walking back from the cinema because it finished at 1 in the morning and there's no public transport back, so it's an hour long walk back, which I regret doing. My feet are killing me, and I've tired myself out, so that's the kind of state of mind we're doing this reviewing. But I had the pleasure of watching Empire of Death. Well, it was actually a double feature. It was last week's Legend of Ruby Road and this week's Empire of Death, back to back at the View in Gateshead. I went in my cosplay, which is also something I'm starting to regret at the moment because I'm not gonna lie, I am very warm in what I'm wearing, so probably gonna go for it as quick as possible so I can get out of this wig and get out of this jacket coat. So as a double feature, there was a 15-minute interval and then a special message, which was basically just Millie Gibson introducing the episode and being like, "Thank you for watching Doctor Who." The special message was nice. I don't know why we needed a 15-minute interval. I feel like you could have just shown Legend of Ruby Road 15 minutes later and then started this episode on midnight, but whatever. I mean, it's not really. So, what are my thoughts on this episode? Well, I think it was all right. I think it could have been better, but I think it could have been worse. I don't think it's any worse resolution. I watched the Tales of the TARDIS re-edit of the Pyramids of Mars. I have seen the Pyramids of Mars before, but I watched the Tales of the TARDIS version. And you know, in a sense, Sutek's original being defeated was quite anticlimactic and somewhat of a deus ex machina from the Doctor, because it wasn't really anything. It was kind of it was like a late stage. Lily, stop sitting on my keyboard. You're gonna mess things up. It was a relatively late stage solution, which kind of also what happened here. But not really. I think. Okay, so let's start with some of my issues with the episode. One, the stakes. If you're gonna kill off everybody, then I know there is no stakes, because I know that if you're killing off everyone, then something is gonna happen that brings everybody or brings most people back. It's the same kind of lack of stakes really in Endgame. And if your stakes are obviously everyone's gonna come back, then question is, what is the cost going to be to bring everyone back? But there never seemed to be any kind of risk of cost. There never really seemed to be that the Doctor was putting on or Ruby were ever putting themselves in danger for the cause. You know, for this, they face this massive odds, and they never seem, when we know everyone's going to come back. We know that's not a mistake. We know the stakes are we know the stakes of people who are currently here and what's going to happen to them. And there was never any of that kind of risk or threat, I think. It's happened before in Doctor Who. I think it was maybe the same. I mean, the other kind of similar episode I remember is the Big Bang, where obviously everyone dies. And you know that means that everyone's going to obviously come back. But you have to, so the question is, what's the cost? But even then, it wasn't so much a threat. But I think there was so much other interesting character work going on. I was fine. I don't know if there's really much character work going on in this episode, especially between the characters. I mean, with the Doctor, yes, but the characters, no. Speaking of character work, I was also quite disappointed that we didn't really get much of Sutek. Specifically, we didn't get much of Sutek and the Doctor interacting. They don't interact much, to be honest, in the Pyramids of Mars. I think they have like one confrontation, one or two. They have one scene in the Tara Frost serial where they talk, the Doctor gets put under mind control, and then they've got that bit at the end of the Doctor traps Sutek in the time stream, the time void. So I was hoping, but obviously the dialogue we're given, the way Tom Baker's Doctor acts, we're meant to understand this is a massive, massive threat. And to be fair, the episode sells it as a massive, massive threat. And one that the Doctor was lucky to survive. So Sutek's obviously gonna have a bone to pick with this one person who, against all odds, has defeated them. And he, to be fair, they do act like they have a bone to pick, but we don't get enough of it. We could have much more between the Doctor and Sutek, I think. But hey, I focus on the negatives. Let's talk about some of the positives. And I was thinking about this on my walk home, and now it's obviously gone away from my brain. I do like the way they've kind of, not canonized, because it's always a canon, but the way they've kind of reinforced the continuity of the Remember TARDIS as a separate thing to the actual TARDIS. But the idea, so I like the idea that they're playing around with the fact, and they teased this in last week's episode, I like the fact that they're playing around with the idea that time is memory, memory is time, and so if you remember, if you open up a time window and you do all that kind of stuff, why is my chat bot not working? If you, sorry, the idea about, you know, feeding enough memory into time and time into memory, you're going to generate something called a time, a Remember TARDIS. And it's not the TARDIS and the Doctor owns, it's a separate TARDIS that is generated from the memories. It's not something that really needs much more explanation than that. That's the kind of the whimsy and the mystical and the time stuff that you get in Doctor Who. So I like what they kind of explain. I've not actually finished watching Tales of the TARDIS because I am already doing a rewatch of Classic Who, all the episodes I've missed, and so I'm waiting until I get to those episodes in my rewatch, and then I watch the Tales of the TARDIS bookends, but the classic edits, if that makes sense. So I haven't watched them all yet, so I haven't seen all the kind of the new bookend bits that they record of all the old Doctors. So I don't know if this is consistent with all your explanations about the Remember TARDIS, but it seems like a nice kind of way to explain it. Jess Hurd has said on my channel that they swear if Mrs. Flood is the master but all over. I swear if Mrs. Flood is the master, but all over 9 out of 10. Okay, right. So you're rating the finale as 9 out of 10. Beats up some of the other finales. Right. Okay. I follow you now. You wrote that very, very clunkily. I'm sorry. It took me a second to read it. What else did I like about this episode? Obviously, whenever Sutek was on screen, Sutek was a extremely foreboding presence. Gabriel Wolf did not pull any punches in playing the voice. I could still kind of, well, I can't say Sutek now without kind of trying to impersonate Gabriel Wolf's voice. There was a lot in this episode, and I feel that's gonna put like a massive critique on it. I'd say there was a lot of stuff, but not enough substance. Like we had all the things Remember TARDIS, we had all the things about the Doctor going to these worlds which are destroyed and talking to these people. We had a lot of sitting down talking. And I feel like it would have worked if this was like a 3-parter or something, but I feel like, well, no, actually, sorry, let me backstrap. That's not the issue. It's not the issue that we did all this. It's that the issue is that we didn't keep tying this into the theme, or like push it into like character work or something like that. You know, it was a lot of stuff happening, but for example, Parting of the Ways is a very, very strong finale because it isn't about the Doctor defeating the Daleks. It's about kind of a Doctor. Will the Doctor be prepared? Will this survivor of a war be prepared to commit the same atrocity they think they committed the first time? Would this person be willing to commit a genocide a second time? Is what Parting of the Ways is about. That's the substance of Parting of the Ways. It's not clear what really is kind of in here. Obviously, there's a whole bit about the Doctor being like, you know, you're making me the monster you are because I'm having to now kill you. And that was a very nice moment, but it wasn't the substance of the episode. Also, just a quick kind of nitpick. When did Mel die? Like, so it was established that at some point Mel died, and that's why Sutek could control them because they were dead, and obviously the dead is his domain. When did that? Did like Mel was this Mel just a late casualty of the dust? Did I miss something? Did she just die of old age? Wait, when did Mel die for Sudex to take over their body? I don't really get that, but whatever. I do like the kind of resolution though of taking things to remember TARDIS that was like part of Ruby and the Doctor's shared history and using that to essentially in this whistle thing that lets the Doctor take back control of the TARDIS and use that to kind of drag Sutek into the time vortex. But obviously, why would that kill him? Isn't that where isn't he a being who could naturally travel through the time vortex anyway? Like, I don't be wrong. I'm happy to take it as a given that you explained to me about the time vortex kills Sutek. That's I find, but also why? How? Because we see when Sutek explains how they took over the TARDIS, it was because they were already in the time vortex because that's the Doctor trapped them. So I'm not sure why this is what kills them in the end. She doesn't just get possessed. She was dead. Unless you're saying that the possession is what killed her. Which, I mean, it's not, again, it's fine. It's not like the biggest part of the episode. It just, I was like, trying to work out if I missed something. It would be a stronger reveal if if there was something which was that you were if it'd be a stronger reveal if when it's revealed that she died you're like, oh, that's what happened in that moment, but the weird thing happened. I guess it's consistent with Pyramids of Mars where possession does kill people, but the people who get possessed Pyramids of Mars are people who have like Sudek's attacked, like has been in Sudek's presence, and not everyone gets killed. I don't know. I mean, the Doctor didn't get killed from the possession. He got strangled and didn't actually kill him. But Scarman got killed by the possession. So, I do like the clip usage of. So yeah, I like this episode. Just touching into the whole like explaining the Remember TARDIS thing in more detail. I do actually. I was wondering, is this episode's gonna like take a moment where we like fade to black? And it's like, oh, that's when they must have done the Tales of a TARDIS episode, and they actually do it in a sense. There's a part in the Remember TARDIS where you're like, oh, this is pretty much like they clearly spend time in the Remember TARDIS, and the Doctor changes outfits and Ruby changes outfits. And you're like, okay, well, at some point during this time, they must have done that Tales of the TARDIS episode. So I actually like that they kind of explain that and fill it in, and it's clear in a way which doesn't kind of alienate people who didn't watch the episode. But even so, the Doctor still also re-explains it like a second time in this episode about what kind of the history is. They take the whole the whole colonization approach towards Pyramids of Mars, which is really nice to see. We see clips of Pyramids of Mars on. Remember how this is a nice way to do a clip show because it's like, where is footage coming from? Oh, well, it's the people's memory, but for some reason from a third person perspective. Also nitpick when what's his name, the scientific advisor shoots bullets from their swagway. I'm pretty certain they're shooting literally past one of the guards. It's nitpick, but it's kind of like you're shooting like you don't have clear line of sight, my friend. I guess Mrs. Flood is a mystery for another season. Oh, okay. Here's my big thing. Here's my big thing. I see you viewer count dropping. Stick around. Here is my big thing. I'm kind of in two minds about how they've done this, but listen in. So obviously we get the resolution at the end, and I'm fine with the whole thing about how Clara's mum is actually nobody, and the reason she was so important is because people have made a giant mystery around her, and that mystery around her is kind of reverberated back through time and retroactively actually made it a mystery, but really there's no mystery. It was just, I mean, it doesn't really explain why we're so. Also, actually, let me pause a second before I get into my big point. So, how did they end up actually finding her mother? Was it just from the information they got? Because it implies that they do a DNA scan, the unit do at the end after Sudek's defeated, and they find her mother. But okay, let me look up it chronologically. So they go. they go into the future where they know there'll be DNA records of Ruby's mother, and they do a scan. And for some reason, that takes far too long, even though, as someone who works in database management, presumably once you have Ruby's record, it will have a relationship to her mother's record. Right. Okay. So it makes sense if they go to 2020, it's 2024. Sorry, 2042. If they go to 2042 and they scan Ruby's DNA and it shows up Ruby's name. But no. Here's the thing. They go back to Unit in 2024 after they defeat Sutek and they do another DNA scan. Or they do a DNA comparison check. If they might have already, and then do they get Ruby's mother's name and Ruby's father's name? Now it might be they already had that information and they were just confirming it, but what were they confirming it to? Because they don't have her DNA in that era. They don't have her DNA in that era. They only have her DNA 20 years in the future. So I don't know if that's the graphics thing. It's I get what they were going for. And it's not like a massive issue, but it's not clear. It was. I don't know if you were here early in the video. The ending was a bit Deus Ex Machina. Well, it was a bit. It was less Deus Ex Machina than Pyramids of Mars is. The first time Sutek is defeated, the Doctor does something which has no previous, from what I can remember, has no previous establishment in the episode. They fail to stop Sutek the way they originally planned to, so the Doctor just travels back to Mars, travels back to London and stops Sutek in a way which they could have done the entire time, really, and not bothered with everything else. In a sense, possibly, but then you wouldn't have a story. Anyway, my big point. So, the coder of the episode, they are sitting at their TARDIS is outside the coffee shop. They're deliberating whether or not Ruby should go and surprise Ruby's birth mother. And the Doctor is talking about how, maybe we should respect Ruby's mother's wishes about, she had all this time to find Ruby and she chose not to, and maybe we should respect her wishes and not force the issue. And it's clear. It is clear the Doctor is trying to justify their own decision to not go and find Susan. That is clear that they're talking more about themselves than they are talking about Ruby's mother. And then Ruby just ignores the Doctor or disregards the Doctor's advice and goes and speaks to her mother anyway. And it goes well. It goes brilliantly. And that is the brilliant setup, the exact setup for the Doctor to be like, maybe it is time for me to go back and see Susan. And yes, I know Big Finish and the Five Doctors. I know, but Big Finish isn't canon. I'm sorry, it's not. It's not TV canon. It's valid storytelling, but it's not TV canon. TV writers consistently avoid audiobooks. We don't count that. And the Five Doctors doesn't count because the Five Doctors doesn't count. It's canon, but it doesn't count. Stay with me here. That's the perfect setup, the perfect thematic setup for the Doctor to be like, it's time for me to go see Susan. And I said last week, with all the promise of Susan's return, this is the perfect time for a Susan cameo. And I don't do it. And I'm in two minds. I'm not entirely disappointed. I feel like I'm going to have to adjust for my Big Finish doesn't count speech, but I'll do that in a second. But I'm glad you agree. I'm in two minds about this. One, I suppose Susan coming back, if played by Carol Ann Ford, which is what I want to happen. Carol Ann Ford is alive. Even if Carol Ann Ford comes back and regenerates, I really want Carol Ann Ford to come back as Susan, even if they never regenerate. I don't want us to just jump to a regenerated Susan with a new actor. I want us to make the most effect we still have Carol Ann Ford with us. And I suppose that is a big enough thing in Doctor Who history that you perhaps don't want to relegate it to the coda of another episode. That I get. So, and in the episode's defense, they don't completely ignore their own thematic setup. They build up to the idea that they're talking about the Doctor and Susan, and Ruby's like, you should go back and see your own granddaughter. So in a sense, that does kind of... It acknowledges its own setup. So maybe I'm fine with it have it at the end. But I still really want us to see Susan again while we have the chance to. No, but even if they brought the DNA, well, for one, they didn't because they came back to the present and Ruby destroyed the only device they had that stored that information on, which was the visor. So they didn't bring anything back with them. But even if they did, bringing back DNA is just a bunch of numbers. Bringing back those bunch of numbers doesn't mean anything if you don't have a record which tells you who that points to. What they were going for is fine, it makes sense. Just an execution, it was messy, and I say it enough, so I should say it to myself. The minutiae of a plot execution isn't entirely important so much as the spirit of it. We can fill in the holes. I just think it's kind of as a database manager in my real life, I just find it a bit annoying. That's all. Yeah, in my mind, just to kind of explain my Big Finish opinion, everything that's not TV, so the books, the comics, Big Finish, I see those as the legends that people tell about the Doctor. Some of it is true, some of it is hyperbole, some of it is lost in like the way that myths get mixed up and myths get exaggerated and myths get twisted around. The TV, what happens in TV is what happens with the Doctor. What happens in like audiobooks and what happens in comics, that is what people have heard has happened. And if the TV contradicts it, then that means that people have heard wrong. If it doesn't contradict it, it might have happened. I don't think the boss is Sutek. I think if the boss was Sutek, it would have been more explicit. I don't think Russell T Davies as a writer wouldn't have that as a plot point and not make it explicit to the audience. I don't think there's that level of I know nothing even insinuates it as well. The way that who mentions the boss? The Meep mentions the boss. I think Rogue mentions a new boss who we're all assuming is the same boss. I don't know if anyone else. I can't remember if anyone else mentions the boss, but I don't think nothing in this episode signifies that the boss is Sutek, and neither would it really make sense. I don't know what, for example, the Meep is doing that would be serving Sutek's plan. I get the implication that Sutek has had zero influence. The only I think what episode has said is the only power that Sutek has had whilst they were building up their presence was just planting the Susan Twist clones around time. That was the only influence they've had until they decided to manifest. They didn't have any other powers other than that. I think is so. I don't think they are the boss. I think the boss is someone else. The Pneumatic Gazette. Which reboot are you Which universe reboot are you talking about? Do you mean the one in the Big Bang, or? Oh, you mean the one that happened in this episode? Sorry. Yeah. Well, this is how it happens when you have so many universal reboots. Right. The one that happened in this episode. No, I think it's pretty. I think this episode. I don't think this episode is suggesting that I think if this episode wanted to suggest, I don't think the Doctor was trying to undo every single death, because I think that would go against the spirit of at least some of the Doctor's beliefs. Certainly, the Doctor has held the view that death is an important part of life, and that things that die should stay dead. I mean, they say as much in the Brain of Morbius. If you start bringing people back from the dead too much, you stagnate society. That's a direct quote from the Doctor in the Brain of Morbius. Well, not a direct quote. It's the spirit of the words. I think the Doctor was explicitly just undoing what was it they called it, the death wave, I think is what the woman on that planet named it. I think the Doctor was just undoing the death wave. And yes, I think the reference to the tech person that they haven't got yet is a dig at Elon. It's a generic dig on rich tech bros, i.e. Elon Musk being the current one. I think people, yeah, I saw on Twitter, people were getting some people were getting very hooked on that line, and it's the same joke as the Prime Minister line. It's just a dig at a celebrity. I don't think so. I mean, they could do. Look, if Doctor Who does one thing, future writers will take a given plot point and use it to justify another plot point. As it stands, I don't think that's the intent of this episode. Otherwise, again, just from Russell T Davies' writing, I think if it was their intent, Russell T Davies would have made it explicit. I don't think they're doing Gallifrey. I think this episode explicitly, all the planets the Doctor mentions are all the planets that the Doctor mentioned earlier in the episode that got destroyed by Sutek's power. So I think it was pretty clear they were only just undoing what Sutek had done in this episode. A future writer might change that, and that's fine, and that won't necessarily contradict anything because, like you say, it's not closed off as a possibility. I just don't think that's the intent, and so I'm not going to assume it is the case at the moment. So, yeah, I think my impression of both these episodes is the same. They're entertaining, like in tone and in presentation. They're tense in tone and presentation, but they're just too full of strands. Like, too much stuff is happening that doesn't really, I think, service. I mean, there's many ways to bring back Gallifrey. Look, if Doctor Who does one thing, it's that death. I mean, Sutek's death was meant to be permanent. When Sutek died in Pyramids of Mars, when Sutek was when the Doctor said they killed Sutek in Pyramids of Mars, that was meant to be a pretty permanent death. And then it's what, 50 years later, 40 years later, and Sutek's back, and I bet you in a couple of decades time, Sutek will be back. There's probably another villain in like that era of Doctor Who who appeared once and died. And I bet you someone will bring her back in a few decades' time or a few years' time. Like, they do it, and it works. I mean, it works. If they can make it work, make it work. Like I said, I don't really get how the time vortex killed Sutek, because Sutek seems to have happily existed in the time vortex before. So I'm not quite sure what has changed. But I will trust the Doctor in that, I guess. I think part of the Master's character is the fact that they come back. That's like, at this point, if you're questioning why the Masters come back, you're missing kind of the joke of the character. Out of all the characters, the Master's the one who doesn't need an explanation. They can just come back and you're like, yeah, that checks out. That's like a running joke of the character. So overall impressions of both his two-parters, I think it was entertaining, so I don't hate it. I don't think they're bad. I think they were tense. I think definitely that the Sutek cliffhanger was the highlight of a two-parter. It was a very good build-up that paid off very well. I just think the journey to get towards it was not clean and not gentle. It was very bumpy in a way which kind of like, it's not bumpy in a sense of I'm just struggling to follow the red herrings. It was just bumpy in that you're trying to be too clever and you're putting too many things, and it's like I'm getting a bit lost. And then this episode was kind of doing the same thing. Like you had the whole section of Remember TARDIS, you had the side quest to that planet for Doctor to get metal, and it was a nice moment, but like the pacing was kind of stretched out. And then you had the whole tying in 73 yards to the episode, which was nice, I guess, because that's a very kind of 73 yards is one of those few episodes which is very kind of experimental, genre playing, doesn't necessarily have to be a Doctor Who episode, but just happens to be a Doctor Who episode that you can move on from. But it's nice to tie that back into the finale. But it did kind of make the pacing a bit weird. I bet you will see a bunch of criticisms of both these two episodes about the pacing. And I think actually you might see criticism of the entire series about its pacing. It is a weird 8 episode series, which kind of feels, I don't know. People have said there's not a terrible amount of character work between Ruby and the Doctor, and I think I might agree. And I think a lot of that is a lack of kind of TARDIS scenes. We don't have many TARDIS scenes where they kind of connect. I've seen people say that, and I kind of have to agree with that. So it does feel very much like, but you know, I say that, but that's very classic Who. Like that's how classic Who works. You don't really have that kind of debrief in the TARDIS. So it doesn't quite work for modern TV, but it is still like within the spirit of Doctor Who. Who do I think took the tooth? Wasn't there like, didn't somebody point out that some of the episodes wearing red? I don't know. Oh, I had theories about this like months ago, and I've moved on from that. The finale of I assume you mean series 4, not season 4. We don't call it season 4, unless you do mean season 4, which is the last, which would be the final first Doctor and the first second Doctor. I think the finale of season 4 is Moonbase. But no, I realize you meant series. The finale of series 4 is Stolen Earth and Journey's End, and series 3 was Utopia and Sound of Drums and Last of the Time Lords. It's interesting actually because we have these big discussions about season finales and season finales being this massive big event. But something that I realized rewatching classic Who is that season finales weren't really a thing. Like pre 2000s, even early 2000s. I mean, I think of say like Star Trek Enterprise, where its final episodes were just final episodes. Sorry, it's like, so think about like Star Trek Enterprise, where like the last episodes of the season were just episodes. Like they weren't a build up of anything. It was just complete episodic, and you know, whereas you have things like Doctor Who, which even though they're episodic, like at least 2005 Doctor Who is very episodic still. But you have a build up. That's because you have the arc words to land on. I mean, it is still episodic, I guess. I mean, it was kind of a bit. Not all of New Who has had that kind of 3-episode build up. I don't think. I mean, like, for example, World, Enough and Time and The Doctor Falls was a 2-parter that didn't really follow on from the previous episode. Heck, even The Time of the Doctor. The name of the Doctor, which I think is a fantastic series finale. In series 7, that's a single episode finale. That's not even a 2-parter, and that lands very well. Like, I don't necessarily. It's not the length; it's the pacing. I think it's the pacing. I don't know. This series has felt a bit different. It's felt more episodic, I think, is the thing. It's felt more disparate from each other. I don't know if that's an issue. It's different, and so obviously if you're used to certain Doctor Who, things being different makes you feel uncomfortable. And I think we need to be careful to not mistake something being different, something being worse. But people are criticizing that they haven't really had a chance to understand kind of Ruby as a character beyond their mysteries, and I think that's maybe true, but that's also very true of loads of classic Who companions. So, but I do think the pacing of this 2-parter was my biggest issue was probably the pacing and the lack of substance. But boy, was it still executed very well. I do wish they had more interaction between Sutek and the Doctor. I think if I had one bugbear it's the lack of interaction, because I think we only had like 2 scenes where they directly confronted each other. And we only had 2 scenes where they only directly confronted each other in Pyramids of Mars, but I kind of wanted an escalation from that. Like, this is a villain who has a long vendetta against the Doctor. Give them more. Give Ncuti Gatwa and Gabriel Wolf, 2 excellent actors, more to do with each other, please. Yeah, it's fine to have like preferences, and it's fine to express preferences, and it's fine to be critical. I think the issue is when you confuse critique and preferences. Both are fine, just don't confuse them. I think that's my issue. You can be critical of something. I'm saying that, and then it doesn't really make much sense, because something not meeting your preference is in a sense of critique. Whatever. Look, it's 3 in the morning. I'm not gonna make any sense to deal with it. On that note, I probably should actually be wrapping up at this point, because in 2 hours' time, I am going to Comic-Con Yorkshire to meet Christopher Eccleston, and I'm not sorry. LSG. I'm not. This isn't at you. This is. I'm taking a point and then making a general point, and then I was like, actually, that point was a bad point. It's not an attack against. I'm not assuming anything you're saying. I'm taking your points and then making a wider discussion around it. That's something I do. Crap, my train's actually at 4:30, not 5, which kind of cuts my time a bit shorter. Okay, yes. You've said good night, which gives me permission to leave, because I'm very bad at ending videos. So I will end here, because what I thought was 2 hours, but now 1.5 hours, I've got to be at the train station, because otherwise I'm going to miss meeting Christopher Eccleston. And I need to shave, and I need to pack my cosplay, because I'm not wearing this cosplay, I'm wearing a different cosplay. So I'm going to go do that. I'm also overheating. Also, I need to eat, because I haven't eaten yet. So here are the credits. And that's Doctor Who done for a while. Actually, when is the next Doctor Who? Is it Christmas? So that's another 6 months. Wow. Well, that's gonna be a stretch. We've had 2 months of Doctor Who, and now we've got 6 months without it. Thanks for the sub. And yeah, okay. Well, I'm gonna leave now, because I'm sure LSG wants to go to sleep, and I need to pack, and I need to have food and stuff. So goodbye, everyone.